Okay, good evening, everybody. I think we'll make a start, and I'm sure there'll be more people coming in the room as we go along. We're actually going out live on YouTube at the moment, so if anybody has any issues with Zoom, you can switch over to that, and you can find us on the front page of the JSCN website. If you don't know where that is. Good evening, everybody. I think we'll make a start, and I'm sure there'll be more people coming in the room as we go along. And you can tell we're actually on. We're YouTube. Actually going out live on YouTube at the moment, so if anybody has. There we go. That's always a good check. If it's echoing back to you, you know that you've gone live. Welcome everybody once again. This is Connecting Small Histories, and it's the very first opening event of our very first ever history festival. We've got 2 weeks of fantastic lineup for you, and this is the first night. I'm so pleased and honoured and very humbled to see so many of you. And if you do miss it, or you have to go out and walk the dog or something like that, about a week after the end of the festival, we will be posting them up so that you can catch up. But it will be quite a while before they actually come up and you can do a catch-up service, but it will be there eventually. There's so many people who've registered tonight. We have actually bought more seats, so you can all come in, but we do welcome you if you're watching us streaming live out there on the internet somewhere. And I'm very pleased that our History Festival has attracted a lot of support, not just from people like yourselves, but also from other Jewish heritage projects. And we're going to be joined during the next fortnight by Hidden Treasures. We were there too. Lily's Legacy, Jewish Heritage Europe, and Foundation for Jewish Heritage in one way or another. Some of them will be presenting, some of them will be chairing, some of them will just be in the room with us. But we're really pleased to have their support, and thank you very much to all those projects and to all the projects who we've had touch base with over the last 9 or 12 months. About 3 years ago, I started thinking about how we could map, and I started asking people all over the country how we could map the footprint of the Jewish communities all over the country, because then it's not just the big footprint in London and in Manchester, but we do have communities all over the place, and I'll come to that a little later. Just so that people would know how widespread the Jewish communities in the UK are. And I want to start by just having a little look at those communities. And well, I'll give you a little flavour of it. I want to show you this short 2-minute movie. I go to share. Well, Jewish Small Communities Network, I just want to tell you a little bit about. We serve around 55,000 people living in or proximate to 100 plus small Jewish communities in around about 72 towns all over the UK. That is 20% of the total Jewish population of this country. We also enable those communities to access support and resources which they might otherwise find challenging. And in addition, JSCN helps bring those communities to a wider audience, to people who want to find them. And we've got lots of initiatives. Most of them really go to supporting the resilience of those communities. And apart from that, we advocate in whatever forums we can on behalf of those communities. We have things like networking meetings, which during lockdown has been running every Wednesday morning for the last year, with community leaders from Edinburgh all the way down to Exeter, from Belfast all the way over to Ramsgate. We have just individuals coming into our coffee break every Tuesday morning. We list around about 100 Jewish events, online events every month, and we do that through our Jewish events calendar, which you can find on the website. And we're working on things like Jewish learning and pastoral care and supporting young families. You can access all that through the JSCN website. Now then, I want to talk about how the project Connecting Small Histories came about. And it was a conversation in a train station with Pam Fox, who herself is a writer and a historian. And she said, would it be useful to have a researcher help me? And I said yes. Then I had no idea what that research was going to do for me, but I said yes. And that led to a conversation with Tony Griffiths, who is now our project researcher, and to Swansea University and Trish Skinner and Sarah May and the team there. And between us all, we came up with the idea of making this footprint of the small communities a bit more apparent to the world out there through looking at the heritage in some of those communities. We would have loved to have gone to every community in the country, but we couldn't, certainly not within 12 months. So we picked 6. And one of the first people who came on board to help us was a guy called Carter Weleminski, who undertook the first part of the project researcher's task for us. And he took us a long way, communicating with lots of communities and bringing in the volunteers who have done the bulk of the work on this project. It is a very volunteer-led project. And I have to say a big thank you to that team, whether you were involved just in the meetings or whether you went on to go and do research. It's been a stellar effort by all of you. And I think it's astounded the whole team, sometimes as well as yourselves. And of course, COVID, well, I'm just going to stop the screen for a second there. COVID, it changed things a bit for us. It changed things quite a lot. It meant we couldn't go out and about. We couldn't travel anywhere. But it didn't stop us doing the project. Many projects, heritage projects, they actually stopped dead in their tracks. They had to go on furlough or they didn't start. We carried on. And although it changed things quite a bit, sometimes it's changed it for the better. We've been out and we've done, I think, even more research than we thought we could do. And we've had this close bond that meeting on Zoom so frequently has brought about, and it's brought us in lots of friends, not just in the UK, but all around the world, in Israel and all sorts of places. I mean, one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to go out and visit schools and libraries and community centres, and we couldn't do that. And so it has changed the way we do that, and we're going to be delivering that sort of part of the project differently. We've got a school book which has taken on a huge amount of importance and which you'll see at the end of the project. It's made us invest far more in making a book of the whole project, a Connecting Small Histories book, which I'm going to mention in a little while as well. And it's also meant that the History Festival, that we plan to be an in-person event in Manchester, where people would travel to, and probably travel in their 10s and 20s to, is now replaced by this online event, where now we've got hundreds of people involved in connecting small histories. I'm actually blown away by it. But it's also meant that, and Heritage Fund, who have backed us and funded us, and we're very pleased to have them and very grateful for the funds that they've put into this project. We couldn't do it without them. Have been very keen to help us extend the project, and we're going to use that extension to actually go out and tell more people, to disseminate the project into more places, to make more people aware of it. And so the project is actually going on a little longer than we intended, although we're not spending any more money, I have to say. We're just spending more time on it. Now then, rather than look at the synagogue records, many of which would not be there anyway, to try and create this research and find out about this heritage, instead we've actually gone to the people for their histories and their stories, and that is very much what you're going to be finding out about in this History Festival, when many of our lead researchers in the 6 locations that we've gone to tell you about their work. Those stories, they reveal the culture and the economic contributions, the cultural and economic contributions that those communities all over the country have given to the areas in which they live. They've made those places part of their own lives, and their lives have become part of those places. And it's illustrated, and you'll see in the stories, if you read the book and if you read the articles on the website and if you listen to the talks in this History Festival. And I suppose really I should have realized that my family history was going to be part of this, but I didn't realize it at all. I really looked on it as part of other people's histories. I suppose I should have known better. But when Hilary Thomas, who you're going to hear from tonight, started on her research in St. Anne's, I started chipping in and saying, well, I can help you with that because my family lived there. And it made me look at my family's history, and I actually discovered a bit more, something that was staring me in the face about my family history. But we're not going to talk about that tonight. That's for another day. But it has become a personal journey a little bit for me as well, not just as project leader, but as somebody whose history is bound up in one of the small communities. Over the festival, we're going to be finding out these fascinating histories and stories. You're going to hear about Lisa's research in Barrow in Cumbria. You're going to hear from Hilary tonight. You're going to hear Anne's research on Eastbourne. That's going to be fascinating. That's Anne's all dressed up for that. She's ready to go. I've seen the pictures. You must sign up for that one if you've not already signed up. And Jane's love affair with the Mayor of Taunton, not a living mayor, I have to say, but that's been a journey as well. Rachel's research is into the Sunderland diaspora, who are all over the world and who are very, very vocal, and we've learnt a lot about Sunderland. And Bella has taken us into cyberspace from a start in Bradford. So those are some of the things you're going to hear from, but also another part of the project. And you'll see that under Connecting Small Histories, it says Sustaining Jewish History, Jewish Heritage Projects. We have brought in so many different projects, existing Jewish heritage projects, and they come into our Heritage Hub, and that's going to remain there forever and a day, well, at least as long as we can keep it going. But we don't have any plans to switch it off ever. So the Heritage Hub on the website and the Jewish Heritage Journal, which is also on the website, are going to be curated. It's already populated with around over 50 heritage projects in this country. And we're supported by heritage projects like Jewish Heritage Europe as well, who have an interest here in the UK, but also in Europe. And we've heard from other heritage projects around Europe, and that's interesting. A lot of those and a lot of the things which connect all together and make up this rich tapestry you'll find on the Heritage Hub. So visit jscn.org.uk and you'll find all those things there, and it'll be added to over the years, and it'll be curated by a board who will meet twice a year and look at the submissions, and we'll be adding to it all the time. Now, I mentioned the Connecting Small Histories book, and that is currently in its design process. It's in its final stages. And I can see that Ruth Gruber has actually put the link to Jewish Heritage Europe in the chat there. You'll find it on the website as well. But the book, I'll just give you a quick look. It's going to be, part of the work, the heritage that our researchers have done, but it's also going to be available more widely. And for those people who want it, we're also going to make it available publicly as well. So I'm going to just share that just to give you a quick look. If I just take it on there. Oh, that was a slide. That is my mother walking down the street in St Anne's in the mid-1930s. So that's my link into Hilary's research. There's the Heritage Hub. If you go on the website, you'll see it. And this is a draft version of the Connecting Small Histories book. It's hopefully going to be available during April. And if you want to pre-order it, you can make a donation and we'll send it out to you. And you'll find that on the History Festival page on the website, which is where you click to register for tonight. But that takes us well and truly, almost to Hilary's spot. I've talked for so long, but before I introduce Hilary, I just want to give thanks to our wonderful team. Sarah May and Trish Skinner have trained our volunteers so that they can go out and do the research. We have Tony Griffiths, who's working now as our project researcher, and before her, Carter Weleminski. And I've mentioned all our lead researchers already, and you'll see them during the festival. But Trish has also gone the extra mile and has put an awful lot of work into this Connecting Small Histories book, and really helping the researchers along the way and find out how to grasp those stories, how to get them and write them and put them in front of everybody. So I'd really like to especially mention Trish for that. But now it's time to present our first presentation of the festival. Hilary Thomas has been researching, is our lead researcher for St Anne's, which is one of the two seaside communities that we're looking at in our project, alongside the two rural locations of Cumbria and Somerset, and the two towns which only just have vestiges of their Jewish community, Sunderland and Bradford. But tonight it's Hilary, and St Anne's is coming under the spotlight. And I'd like to welcome Hilary to tell us all about what some of the things, because you can find out a lot more on the website, some of the things that she's researched in St Anne's. Oops. Hilary, do you want to unmute? There we go.
Jolly good. Good evening, everybody. When Ed invited me to participate in this heritage project last summer, I chose to research St Anne's and to explore how its Jewish community was involved in assisting evacuees and refugees during World War II, and the contribution the community made to the town itself. But before I embarked on this aspect of the research, I felt I really needed to find out about the history of St Anne's Jewish community. In 1987, the synagogue formally celebrated its Diamond Jubilee, which, according to my maths, makes 1927 its foundation year. However, a congregation of sorts actually was established some 15 years earlier, when several Sephardi merchants settled in the town, mostly from Manchester. The Jewish Chronicle of October 1912 reported that a certain Joseph Smuhar had organized a venue for Shabbat and festival services for the very first time to be held in the town of St. Anne's. He'd even built a sukkah in his garden. He was aided in this enterprise by two other Sephardis, David Mordechai Addis, who conducted the services, and Ezekiel Dunus, who acted as the shul treasurer. Plans were in hand also for Hebrew classes for the children and for kosher food to be delivered. How long this fledgling congregation lasted is unknown, because I have not been able to find any other references to it apart from the one in 1912. I think it's most likely because of the First World War that this venture really didn't take off. However, the links with the Sephardi community very much carried on. And as Ed mentioned, in early 1914, his great-grandfather, Joseph Jada, who was resident on North Drive, sent out wedding invitations for the marriage of his daughter Zarifa to Mr. Eli Rahamin Salem, also at St. Anne's. And Eli and Zarifa are, of course, his maternal grandparents. And here we have a picture of them. The family actually left for Manchester soon after the marriage and spent some time in Cairo. They returned by the time of the Second World War, and Ellie, Zarifa and the children settled at 2 Bromley Road in St. Anne's. But what had happened in the meantime to the congregation? At the end of the First World War, Joseph Abraham Hamwi, a textile importer, and other Sephardi merchants, including Salim Abuhab, Jack Masulam, Raphael Hakim, and Moses David Cohen, establish a meeting place for Shabbat and the festivals above Mr. Smith's butcher shop in Orchard Road. Joseph Hamwi served as the shul president throughout the 1920s, and the treasurer of that small community was Gerald Volkenbright. He changed his surname to Gerald Bright when he became the resident leader of the orchestra at the Majestic Hotel until 1926. Later, he changed his name again to one name only, Geraldo. Many of you of a certain era will remember that name well. Mr. Smith's premises were the home for the community until 1928. They then moved to a larger room, this time a little bit more upmarket, not over a butcher's, but over the Union Bank on Park Road. And at the same time, Joseph Hamwi established a social and literary society, which met at his home on North Drive for discussions and debates on religious, political, and artistic matters. A building fund was established. The treasurer was Jacob Percival Rose, who happened to be one of the founder brothers of Great Universal Stores. In 1939, the community had enough money to purchase their own building, a building on Orchard Road, a former Baptist chapel, which had also been the headquarters of the Conservative and Unionist Party. And we have a slide of that building here. Here it is. The official consecration of the building took place in August 1940, and it was fully reported in the Jewish Chronicle. And I'll read the report here. The ceremony was attended by the Mayor and Deputy Mayor of Lytham, the Town Clerk and other civic dignitaries, together with ministers and presidents of Preston, Leeds, Blackpool and London synagogues. The service was conducted by Reverend Garb of Blackpool, together with Reverend S. Evans and A.C. Jaffe of St. Anne's. A stirring sermon was delivered by Rabbi Lehrman of Liverpool. The opening ceremony was performed by Mr. S.J. Myers of Blackpool, and the golden key was given to him by Philip Salter, the treasurer. The president, Aaron Harris, presented a silver trowel to Jacob P. Rose. The ark was opened by Hyman Friedman, and a memorial window was unveiled by Phineas David Weber. And a memorial tablet was unveiled by D. Sanderson, OB. Mr. Aaron Finestone presented Joseph Hamwee with the Golden Book certificate. The names Salter and Weber rang a bell with me, and I wondered if they could be part of the family of my dear friend Corinne Eventhal, née Salter, who sadly passed away in 2003. But after scouring the records, mainly Ancestry, and found my past, I discovered that Phineas was indeed her grandfather, who had settled in St. Anne's in the 1920s, and Philip was her father. Sadly, Philip died in 1941 when Corinne was only 5 years old. And until I started on this project, I had no idea about her early life in St. Anne's. And for me, this has been a lovely personal link. You can find out more about this on the story on the JSCN Heritage Hub. Mention was made in the consecration report of the clergy, including the two young ministers from St. Anne's, Solomon Evans and Alexander Jaffe. Solomon had been appointed in August 1938 and Alexander in August 1940. He combined his ministerial duties with those serving as chaplain to the local RAF camps at Kirkham and Padgate. Alex Jaffe and Reverend Evans' successor, Sidney Ginsberg, established a Zionist Youth Society and a Havonim group in 1942 at the Shul. Now, although the Shul had been functioning since 1920, the members conducted the services themselves until 1934. And that year, they appointed 22-year-old Reverend Leslie Hardman as their first minister. He stayed for 2 years, succeeded by Reverend Harris from Liverpool. In fact, I counted that between 1934 and 1936, the Shul was served by 7 different ministers. This turnover in ministers was not uncommon. Many of the small communities had the same sort of pattern. Reverend Sidney Black was appointed minister in 1946, together with Reverend Emmanuel Feldinger, who became the Chazan teacher and first reader of the congregation. Reverend Black served for 5 years. Emmanuel Feldinger stayed for 30 years. He was a refugee from Czechoslovakia. Several of the people that I've interviewed for this project have fond memories of both of these men. Most of those I interviewed arrived with their families in St. Anne's in 1939 and 1940, mainly from Manchester, Leeds, London and Sheffield. In fact, I reckon the Jewish population of St. Anne's probably tripled in those early years. And at this point, I'd like to thank all my interviewees, most of whom I've only met over the phone or by email. So I'd like to thank them alphabetically so nobody thinks they're the favourite. Sisters Ruth and Beryl née Alexander, Greta Aronson, Ruth née Batesh, Maureen Benson, Stella Bowman, Susan Buckley, the late Dennis Batesh, who sadly died very recently, Anne Cohen, Barbara Frunberg, Estelle Hilditch, Madeline Jackson, Andrew Loof, Jonathan and Brian Lever, Jackie Mesri, Pauline Pike, Mark Rubin, David Sassoon, Sid Tobias, and Audrey née Winston. All the interviews will appear on either the JSCN website or in the project book, which has been mentioned to you by Ed. How did I find these interviewees? I contacted the shul and I put an advert, or an appeal I should say, in the Jewish Telegraph. And as a result, I was able to meet or interview some 20 people with memories of wartime St. Anne's. Now you have to remember that most of those people are now 80 plus. So just bear that in mind. But amazingly, they started off saying, I can't tell you anything. And gradually all the information came forward. Many of their memories were very similar. Being able to see flashes of light over the sea where the bombs were dropping on Liverpool. The presence of the American servicemen in the town who were based at the Walton Air Base a few miles from St. Anne's. Many of the families invited the Jewish GIs to their homes for Friday night dinner and for the festivals, and kept in touch with them after the war. One or two actually visited St. Anne's with their families many years later. Every one of my interviewees felt safe being in St. Anne's, almost unaware that there was a war on. But of course, they were children at the time and they were being protected. Whether or not their parents felt the same is another matter. Several of the Manchester men had their businesses in that city and had to travel daily from St. Anne's. They travelled on the train and played bridge, and it became known as the club train. Several of my interviewees clearly recall the voluntary war work that their parents were involved in for both the Jewish and non-Jewish causes, and I will come back to that aspect of it later. One of the people who contacted me was Andrew Loof. His late mother, Shirley, had often talked to him about the very happy years she had spent in St. Anne's. And we have a picture, I think, of Shirley in the garden of their home in Arundel Road. Keep that one, because no, go back, Ed. Go back to the shul opening in 1940. And in the centre, the little man in the centre with the top hat is Philip Salter. And on the notice board in the top right, it mentions Reverend A.C. Jaffe. I cannot identify any of the other men in the photograph. Maybe just have the next one, please, Ed. And that is Corinne with her mum, Gladys. I just wanted to put that picture in. So going back to Andrew Loof's mum, Shirley, we have a picture of Shirley in the garden. Here she is, and on the back of the photo, it says, "Me in the garden, we grew vegetables, and I had some rabbits in a hutch." The family came from Sheffield in 1939. Shirley and her brother, her parents, Harris, and I've forgotten, but it'll come to me in a minute. And they stayed in St. Anne's till well after the war. At the same time, Shirley's cousins, the Alexander sisters, and their parents and the Winston family, her other cousins, moved in round the corner. They moved to a large flat above a shop in Woodlands Road. The Alexanders lived on the top flat, the Winstons lived in the basement. What Andrew didn't know, and I was delighted to be able to tell him, was that the Leviston grandparents were also in St Anne's, Louis and Hannah, and they were living on South Promenade together with their daughter and her children and son-in-law, Shipra Moss, and round the corner was another daughter, Kate and Aaron Mack, and their daughter. So the whole mishpacha of that family were actually in St Anne's from 1939, 1940. A very interesting story occurred when I interviewed Jonathan Lever, who I think is here this evening. Jonathan came to St Anne's with his parents and baby brother Brian in 1940. They moved to a house on Clifton Drive, and Jonathan told me it was a lovely house with huge grounds, with a cottage in the garden, and they had hens. He had a wonderful time. It was like a big adventure for him. And he went to a small school called Ardrossan School. He told me he went to Cheder, but most of the time he bunked off and went out on his bike onto the beach to watch the planes. Towards the end of the war, Jonathan's name was put down to go as a boarder to a school called Lawrence House. And in 1946, his parents returned to Manchester and Jonathan was due to go as a boarder. However, the school had no room for him as a boarder, so he went as a day board, and his father arranged for him to go and stay with a family called Green. And that's all Jonathan could really remember. All he could recall, they were called Green, and he was very happy, and they were lovely people. So that was one story. The week after Jonathan contacted me, a 90-year-old lady called Pauline Pike contacted me. She had come from Leeds with her parents and started at school in St Anne's. And she and her mother and her father and her brother were very active in the synagogue. Her mother was also active in the St John's ambulance. Her father was a special constable. She and Jonathan were not aware of one another's existence, but I suddenly thought Pauline's single name was Green. Was this the family that Jonathan went to stay with? So I asked Pauline, did you ever have a 10-year-old boy staying with you during the war? And she said, oh yes, I think we did. He was a nice little boy. So I said, well, I think I found him for you. And I rang Jonathan and I said, Jonathan, I think I found the family that you boarded with in 1946. And after 74 years, I got them together. They've not been able to meet yet because of COVID, but they've actually made contact over the telephone. And the amazing thing is, they actually only live 6 miles apart. Jonathan is in Altrincham and Pauline is in Didsbury. So 74 years, I think that's a great outcome. And that's the great thing about doing this research. It's not just finding the facts, it's the human side of the story. And I think I've found that in all the books that I've written and all the projects I've been involved in. It's the people you meet and the links that you manage to make. I wrote a book on Blackburn a couple of years ago, and during that time I came across a family called Rosenberg and made contact with their granddaughter, Susan Buckley. Susan discovered that I was writing about St Anne's and reminded me that the Rosenbergs had moved to St Anne's in the 1930s. And she told me this wonderful story of how her grandpa, that's Jonathan's story in the Jewish Telegraph. So Susan reminded me that her grandparents, Dora and Frank Rosenberg, had arranged to give a home to 3 distant relatives from Vienna. 2 brothers, Isidor and Arthur Tenenbaum, and another cousin, Shifra, can't remember her name, but it'll come to me in a minute. Those people, those 3 people, were sponsored by the Rosenbergs, and they came over to St. Anne's just before the beginning of the Second World War. Sadly, the rest of the family, grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, did not survive the Holocaust. They were put in the camps and never returned. The Rosenbergs looked after the Tenenbaums and Spritzer Hirsch. They paid for their education. They paid for Arthur to go to the Manchester College, where he became an optician. His brother became a professor of ophthalmology and emigrated to America. So the actual good deed that the Rosenbergs did was saving the lives of 3 refugees. Other refugees came to the town, and I know that Joseph and Fanny Rappaport, who had no children of their own, adopted 2 teenage Austrian girls and gave them a home and gave them a life. And these are just a few examples of what was going on amongst the Jewish community in St. Anne's. A young lady called Marilyn Gors, who is a member of the St. Anne's Shul, told me that a cousin of her husband's was evacuated to St. Anne's, and put me in touch with this lady, Estelle Hilditch. Estelle came with her big sister Doreen and lived with a non-Jewish family in 1944 until the end of the war. She had no connection with any other Jewish people during that time. In fact, once or twice she said they went to church on a Sunday. But the non-Jewish family were very kind and they were lovely. And the Myers family, Estelle's family, kept in touch with them for many years and visited well after the war. Of course, St. Anne's wasn't the only town experiencing an influx of refugees and evacuees. And in 1940, in December 1940, the Jewish Telegraph published articles regarding some of the problems facing Jewish evacuees in West Lancashire. In an inspiring sermon, the Reverend Swift, a guest speaker at St. Anne's Shul, explained some of the distress faced by many of their co-religionists of all age groups who've been evacuated. And he urged the community to do all in their power to give help, both practical and spiritual. Cases which demanded immediate action included an elderly Jewish man seriously ill in a hospital who was unable to speak English, Jewish evacuees dying in institutions which had no responsibility or ability to organize burial procedures, women with young children short of money and clothing, the lack of kosher food. This didn't happen in St. Anne's, but it did happen in other communities. But members of the synagogue at St. Anne's, under the leadership of Hyman Weinberg, and I think we have a picture of Hyman here, sprang into immediate action. He set up meetings with all the filed communities, together with others from Lancaster and Preston. And his suggestion was that all the communities unite in the central board and pool their resources. The central office will be established in Blackpool with a clerk, and there will be a visiting minister and groups of volunteers who would visit the evacuees and help to sort out their problems. Hyman set up a finance committee and suggested that each West Lancashire district made a financial contribution to the central fund to provide immediate relief. Cooperation between all the communities was vital in alleviating all the distress. Hyman was a Manchester boy. He then went to live in Southport, but during the war, he and his family came to St Anne's. So the Blackpool Welfare Centre for Evacuees at 14 Milbourne Street came to fruition in 1941, and Hyman officially opened it, and the Reverend Garb consecrated it. And it was reported that the Welfare Committee worked in close cooperation with Mr. Priestley, the area's chief welfare officer. And a report was given about some of the work done by the committee, including help for expectant mothers, the services of a moil, distribution of clothes, payment for burial expenses, and the supply of Passover food. The head of the local welfare committee was a lady called Elsa Barnett, who'd come from London with her husband and children and settled in St Anne's. One of my interviewees, Barbara Frumberg, remembers clearly as a little girl taking clothes down to the Shul communal hall for the refugee children. She was only 6 years old at the time. Just before the war, a group of kinder transport girls was welcomed to the area, and a house on Hornby Road in Blackpool, financed by Mr. Viner and supported by all the filed Jewish communities, became their home. The Jewish Chronicle kept the community involved on the progress of Hyman Weinberg's initiative, and it was mentioned that in 1941 that the St Anne's Synagogue had actually sent more than £100 to the fund. Employment had been found for some of the refugees. 300 garments of clothing for women and children had been donated by Mr. Weisberg. Hebrew education was not neglected at this period. Classes for the evacuee children were held every morning at Orchard Road, and Reverend Goodman had organised teachers to go in to the local schools. The Talmud Torah were involved in providing the teachers at this time. A community conference for evacuee teachers was held in Blackpool with delegates from St Anne's, Fleetwood, Clitheroe, Preston and Southport. The Canon Aspin of St Anne's Parish Church had offered the church hall as a venue for religious classes. There was very much great deal of cooperation between all the communities. In 1941, 22 old Jewish people were evacuated to Kirkham, and Reverend Jaffe and Aaron Harris, who was the president of the shul at the time, provided them with Passover food and fruit. In 1941, some of the children who were guests at the Aishel Port Hotel held an impromptu concert and raised £5.15 for the local Red Cross. In the September, the local Zionist Society organised a dance at the Blackpool Casino, raising £250 for the hostel. And the Blackpool Bethesda Jewish School in Blackpool opened a canteen in 1941, which provided cooking and catering facilities for the families. The Blackpool and St Anne's Evacuation Committee organised equipment for the canteen, and they received a grant from the Chief Rabbi's Canteen Fund. I bet you didn't know that that ever existed. At the same time, money was raised for War Weapons Week by the Jewish community. Hyman Weinberg, Jacob Rose, and Aaron Harris liaised with the local community in this endeavour. The Jewish community worked hard for the war effort. And this lovely item in the Jewish Chronicle, I need to read to you. December 1941. 30 members of St. Anne's-on-Sea Jewish Women's Voluntary Service have among them, since their start in June 1940, knitted 500 garments for the Red Cross and the Mayoress's Comforts Fund, so that every member shall share responsibility. Each in turn acts as hostess at the weekly Monday afternoon meeting. The shilling paid for tea by members has bought all the wool used, with an occasional coffee morning, and has enabled donations to be made to the Spitfire Fund, the Red Cross, St. Anne's Cottage Hospital, the YMCA canteen, the Tank Fund, and a radio for the Lytham Hospital. Every month, £3 is sent to the Central Hospital Supply, and £10 was recently donated to the local Jewish evacuee fund. New members are knitting furiously in response to an SOS from the Mayoress herself for gloves and socks as Christmas gifts for the forces. Officials of this enthusiastic band of workers are Mrs. Hilda Goldstone, Mrs. Barnard, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Travis, Mrs. Jeffey, and Mrs. Cohen, who's in charge of the Red Cross section, which supplies operational stockings and bandages. So as you can see, very much good work is being done in St. Anne's. St. Anne's was a very charitable community. Philip Salter, the St. Anne's Synagogue treasurer, as early as 1940, was organising fundraising events in aid of the local Red Cross and the local YMCA. And the Jewish Women's War Services were also working in tandem with non-Jewish groups, making camouflage netting, assisting with flag days, and with house-to-house connections. Hilda Goldstone and Bessie Lewis acted as billeting officers on behalf of the St. Anne's Synagogue. The Women's Zionist Society, formed in 1942 under the leadership of Rachel Blond, Dorothy Rubin, and Bertha Raffles, raised thousands of pounds for charity during and after the war. Sadly, many young men from the town served in the forces, and 3 of them lost their lives. Private Cowan, Radio Officer France, and Sergeant Harold Alexander. So despite all the hardships of war, it appears that the St. Anne's community worked hard to make life easier for refugees, evacuees, and fellow men. Charity and good deeds seem to be the order of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Hilary.
Sorry, I've gone on a bit, Ed, over time.
Well, time to ask some questions, and we've had a few questions in. Let's start with the first one. Now, the first one comes from one of the Tony Griffiths, so I don't know who it actually is, but they want to know if their maternal grandparents, the Lipmans, were involved in the shul. Did you come across the Lipmans?
Lipmans.
Yeah.
I think the name is on the notice board. The shul notice boards, pictures of it were very kindly provided by Glenn Bird, who works at the shul and has been very, very helpful. And I think the name E. Lipman is on the board, yes.
And another one here about people who featured in the early 1940s. So Stephen Yaffe, who's a well-known Belfast person, he says his father was minister in St. Anne's.
Yes, that was Alexander Jaffe. Yes.
Sorry, say that again. I was talking.
His father was Alexander Jaffe, who I've spoken about.
Right. So he features in the records of the Shul, presumably.
There are no records for the Shul, sadly.
Ah.
I'm afraid the Shul records totally do not exist. I was told there were bags of them down in the cellar. Marilyn Gores went down into the cellar in the middle of the summer and found absolutely nothing, which is a great pity. So to answer your question, there are no minute books, there are no records, early records available. There might be later records, but there are certainly no records available of the early days.
Well, I have to say that was not unique, because I went to look for my parents' records in Blackpool as opposed to St Anne's, and they'd gone.
Yes. I'm afraid that this is a story, and John Cowell will tell you the same thing, that when you look for records of the early communities, there aren't any.
Trish is saying that we've actually got evidence, a photograph of Marilyn looking in the cellar for
yes,
these
but Marilyn has made me promise not to show it on the screen.
Okay, well, we won't. You mentioned John. He's asking, did you find any evidence of a Jewish presence? Were there any Jews active in St Anne's in the 1800s?
I found one family in 1897. They lived there from 1897 to 1904. It was a family called Samter, Julius Samter, who was a cotton merchant. And he and his wife Frances and his two children lived in St Anne's for a very short time. And the reason I came across him, there was a little article in the Jewish Chronicle congratulating young Cecil Samter on his music exam distinction. And as a result, I looked up Samter in all the records and discovered that the family were there just for a few years. But I didn't find any other Jews in St Anne's in the 19th century at all. Thank you for that question, John.
Mike Levy has said that he thinks he can recognise some people in that photograph with all the guys with the top hats, with the silk top hats.
Oh, how wonderful. So, well, would you ask him to provide me with that information? Because that would be absolutely marvellous. And we can put that in the book.
Well, we'll try and put the two of you together on that. And John Cowell made brought up another thing. You've written in some other articles in the project about Sidney Sharma. Now, I think Sidney Sharma Sidney was his anglicised name. I think he was Salim Sharma, if I'm right.
It might have been. He was certainly from Sephardi background, and yes. He actually was your grandfather's business partner, Ed.
He was indeed, yes.
Yeah. Sidney Sharma was a great force in the Southport community, and any of you who haven't read John's amazing book on the life of the Southport Jewish community ought to get it and buy it, because it's a wonderful piece of work. And Sidney Sharma was a great force in the Southport community. However, by the time he got to St Anne's, I think his energy was spent with all the Bruigus that was happening in Southport. So he took a back seat when it came to life in St Anne's.
Well, he started off living, I mean, I think he was born in Manchester, but then he moved to St Anne's as a young man.
And he lived in Blackpool for a short time as well.
Yes.
Then Southport, and then he came back to St Anne's, and he died in St Anne's.
And you mentioned about this wedding invitation of my grandparents.
Yes.
The wedding invitation is to Salim Sharma.
Right.
That's the name on it. So we've got more. There's quite a few points being made. So I know. Let me see. Rabbi Walter Rothschild, who I think is in Berlin at the moment, he said, if I can go back to his question, I can't quite find it. He says that modern archives aren't much better than the ones that you had to deal with. And then oops, the chat has just shifted and I can't see it. Oh yes, so that was that point. And I mean,
oh, I can see that David Schulman has mentioned that there is a web page about the complete ministers of St Anne's, together with a brief biography of each minister. Yes, I noticed that's gone up. There are one or two things in it, David, which need tweaking a bit, and I'll get back to you on those.
Now then, we have time for possibly one person to ask their question in person, and I don't know who it is, but they're called Gallery Galaxy Tab A. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question.
I think they've gone.
I think they've gone. Maybe that was an accidental.
Hello.
Oh.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm Leonard Mars from Swansea, but I was brought up in Blackpool and went to school in Lytham St Anne's. I have 2 points to make. Last year in The Guardian, there was a very fine tribute and obituary to Michael Glickman by Mike Lee, the filmmaker and director. Mike and I were the only 2 Jewish boys in the 6th arts form of King Edward VII School, Lytham. We were good friends, and he is, you know, he was a major architect, and he was a fine son of St Anne's. He was also, I'm surprised to see, there's no mention of Habonim in St Anne's, or as far as I know, and Blackpool and St Anne's had a joint Habonim Ken.
I did mention Habonim being founded in St Anne's in 1942.
Oh, well, okay.
You mustn't have heard it, Leonard.
No, I mustn't have done.
That was mentioned. It was founded by Reverend Jeffrey in 1942. And in fact, Anne Cohen, Nay Goldstone attended there.
Yeah. The other point I want to make is about communal records. Swansea downsized its shul 10 years ago, and in anticipation of that, we lodged all our records, such as we had, and some were from the late 19th century up to the present time, in the main library of Swansea City, where they're looked after by an archivist called David Morris, who had a Jewish grandfather. And we were constantly aware that records went astray. There are some gaps in them because I fear that some secretaries may have taken them home and got lost that way.
I think you'll find, Len, I think you'll find that your community is in the is in the minority. So that's a very good thing that they have done. And it's a great pity that other communities haven't followed suit. As you know, John and I wrote a book on Bolton. I wrote on Wigan and Oldham and Blackburn, and honestly and truthfully, there were 90% no records available. However, I did manage to find out an awful lot of information.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I enjoyed the talk.
Thank you. And there's quite a few people saying that they knew this person and that person. So the Leftons saying that, well, I think it's Philip, his mother was kinder transport from Hanover and stayed at the hospital in Hornby Road in Blackpool.
The hospital, yes, yes. In fact, I contacted Philip when I heard about that.
And Lydia Collins, and I think that's the Lydia Collins who wrote the book.
It is indeed. Lydia's late uncle was Dennis Batesh. And Lydia mentions the Shappers. And actually, Dennis mentioned to me that he was very friendly with the Shapper boys at school.
Yes, yes. Well, Dennis.
See, Ed, I could have talked for another hour, but you wouldn't let me.
Dennis Patesh was a friend of my my Uncle Joe as well, my mother's brother. And that's been fascinating, and there is lots more to come. So thank you very much, Hilary. If you want to read Hilary's background, it's in the downloadable pack, which you can find on the History Festival page. It's got her biography and all the biographies of all our other presenters as well, or short biographies anyway. And it's time now just to tell you about what's coming up. And tomorrow we have in the morning, well, we have 2 sessions tomorrow at 10:30 to 11:45. We have Mining for Meaning, Family History and Research. Maybe you saw Ruth Badley in one of our other Zoom meetings in the last sort of 6 months, but she is talking about her research. And we've also got Stuart Rosenblad of the Irish Jewish Genealogical Society, who's talking, if we knew what we were doing, we would not call it research. So both of those speakers we have tomorrow morning, a very rich session. And tomorrow evening, we have Jewish Tales of the Remote Refugee. So we have Trish, who is going to be relating Lisa's research, which is from Cumbria, Traveller's Tales from Cumbria. And we also have Tiffany Beebe from the University of Colorado, who is talking about her research into refugee industrialists in the UK. So Jewish refugees coming into the UK. 2 great talks tomorrow. Thank you for all your questions tonight. And thank you all for coming. We've had nearly 100 people in the room tonight, and it looks like we're going to have plenty of people coming tomorrow as well. So do tell your friends, and you can catch up with this talk. We will be making some notes about any interesting points, I'm sure, and including those where appropriate. So thank you once again to Hilary. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow or one day over the next fortnight. And thank you, and good night until tomorrow.
Thanks, Ed.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks.